Well, I think we have to sort of begin by thinking about what a great book is, what makes a book great, and why should we be giving our time to these artifacts. A great book is a book that we could not have written ourselves. That is, and that's part of its greatness. It's something that approaches us from a place beyond our own capacity and experience. But it's also something that was written for us, something that was the author intended us, people like us, to actually read it. So it's a kind of portal to a way of thinking that we wouldn't have access otherwise. And we're on this planet for a short while, and we have to ask questions, very important questions. We have to figure out, we have to make decisions in our life. We have to figure out what it means to be a human being. And the great books give us windows into these questions. They don't simply provide answers that we find on their pages, but they compel us to move closer to the answers that we can access ourselves. So reading great books is part of being human. We're constructed as rational beings. We're imbued with this thing the Greeks called logos, right? This kind of rationality. And logos is a great word because it has a kind of dual meaning. On the one hand, it implies knowledge itself. And on the other hand, it's language. It's sort of like a double helix combined. These things are twisted together. And so the things that we know and the things that a book knows, when you sort of combine those things together, you amplify knowledge and you get to know yourself better. So reading great books is very important. So as we ask the important questions of life, we need access to the broadest possible array of answers. And the Western tradition has been asking questions about human life and human flourishing. I mean, that's actually what the tradition is. It's a query into these things. And by sort of living within this tradition, you experience a multiplicity of answers. There's so many different answers to these questions, each compelling and each has its own kind of validity. And then we have to kind of sort our way through this. There's not only one tradition. When we say we read the great books, it really means we read great books. Some great books are located in the Western tradition. There are great books from other cultures as well. It's perfectly fine for somebody to read out of another tradition, but I think staying with a tradition and its particular conversation over an extended period of time is an important thing to do. So if it's important to read and reflect on what it means to be a human being, to be able to set aside some time in one's life to do that, it's a gift. In ancient Greek, the word for leisure was skoli, which is where we get our word school. And what leisure meant for the ancient Greeks was time set apart. So having some time set apart in one's life, especially if it could be at a formative time in one's life, when one is entering adulthood and preparing for the rest of one's life, it's a gift. And being able to read books at this time together with others who are involved in the same project. At St. John's, our students read about 200 books over the course of their 4 years. They read them across the tradition, but sequentially, chronologically, from the ancient world to the modern, so that they're all reading the same books in the same order together, which means that the conversation that our students have isn't simply with the books, but it's with each other. And being able to share that conversation with other, with one's peers at a vital time in one's life, it has profound impact on the students. The conversations aren't limited simply to the classroom. They happen everywhere, in the hallways, in the coffee shops, and dorm rooms, and that. And so really, if there's a great conversation we can trace over time that we call the tradition, there's a kind of smaller version of that happens in the 4 years that one's at St. John's College. It's a kind of a life-size, for an individual, a life-size version of a tradition that expands thousands of years. So I think I don't know that I could speak to Australian education at the primary or secondary level, but in the United States, I think many families have grown increasingly frustrated with what they perceive to be an education that's really geared towards utility, towards a job market, that's sort of stripped away things like the arts and literature and higher order thinking for practical ends rather than other ends. So there are many schools across the United States that have opened now, and most are loosely classified as classical schools that really have a kind of great books curriculum at their core. And in fact, they're growing. The latest statistics that I've come across, there are about 800 high schools that offer this across the U.S. with about 500,000 students now. So it's a major movement. And I think this is a response to the commodification of education that some people see, the kind of hollowing out of education. Parents want their kids to encounter, great things that have been thought, wonderful works of art, pieces of music. They want their children to be shaped and formed, not simply filled with useful knowledge. And these books provide a way to do that. And I think it's, I think it's an important development. It's probably the most important development in American education today. Well, I would almost be bold enough to say that the only kind of learning is discussion-based. And this goes back to our confidence in the Socratic method. What did Socrates do? He went around and he talked to people. He asked questions and he engaged them in conversation. He didn't give them answers. In fact, he denied that he had answers to the questions himself. He presented himself as a fellow seeker. And what seminar-style education provides is a kind of mutual seeking after answers. It's the process of learning that creates meaning itself. So one is an active learner. One's developing one's mind. One is engaged with the text that they're reading, with the conversations going on, and responsible for what one thinks and how one defends one's position. At St. John's, we have really only two rules when it comes to our seminars. So everybody needs to be heard, no matter what their opinion is. We have to respectfully listen to one another. That's the first rule. And the second rule is that every opinion needs to be backed up with evidence. And, using these rules as a kind of, as the ground rules for discussion means that you're able to express a variety of opinions, to test those opinions, to trust one another, to be able to kind of maybe put things out there that you yourself aren't entirely confident in, and that you want other people to respond to. And in the end that nobody is going to judge you. They may judge your opinion, they may judge it faulting, but they're not going to judge you. And that's so important today because we've really lost the sense of civil discourse, our ability to talk to each other without turning against each other. And St. John's is really one of the kind of few places remaining, one of the few institutions where civil discourse is still the order of the day. We have students from across the spectrum. We have students who are, committed atheists to devout believers, students who are on the right, students who are on the left, students who don't know what they are. And they all sit around a table and they struggle together with Hegel. And in struggling together, they find a kind of common ground so that their opinions are shaped and formed through the process of that conversation. Now that's education. I mean, the education comes from the Latin ex ducere, which means to lead out of. And to lead out of what? It's to lead out of ignorance. Now, in a traditional educational model, conventional model, where a student is being lectured at and sort of taking notes, that's not leading somebody out of. So that's sort of filling in a container, a vessel with what somebody else knows. To lead somebody out of, they have to follow you. They have to go with you. There's a kind of a journey and a process. You can only have that through conversation, through participation. So the seminar-style model we have at St. John's is really, I've worked across many different educational institutions, and I've never seen something as electric as a conversation at St. John's College. So it's our hope, although our undergraduate curriculum is exclusively centered on works of the Western tradition. It's our expectation. We're building thinkers and intellects and minds. It's our expectation that that's a foundation, but they're going to explore as widely as possible. That's why we've developed a graduate program in the Eastern Classics, which looks at the classics of China, India, and Japan. We're also developing one on Islamic classics now, because this is the kind of model we want to present, that you can create a foundation in the tradition that you have closest at hand, but you're not meant to stay there. You're meant to take that with you and then go to other traditions. Use your own tradition to reflect upon what they have to offer. Use what they have to offer to reflect back upon your tradition. And when we do this, look, what we're really seeking after more than anything is just simply truth. We're trying to find truth wherever it may lay. And no culture, no person has a monopoly on truth. Truth is sort of scattered like seeds across the world, across history, across time, and we're truth gatherers. That's what we are. By studying the Western tradition, we learn the habits within that tradition that allow us to ask questions, to critique, to analyze. We become truth seekers. We exercise the muscle of the intellect, and we exercise our logos. But we're not meant to stop there. We're meant to go wherever the truth will take us. Well, I think the challenges are well known, and I imagine they're similar in Australia to what we face in the States, and that is that education is being reduced in many contexts to simply job preparation or skill acquisition. And the liberal arts operate in a totally different register. I mean, the liberal arts are really there to teach one how to flourish as a human being, how to seek after truth, how to understand oneself, how to gain access to this elusive thing we call wisdom. So they're radically different models of education. And what most people don't understand is liberal arts education prepares you for that other stuff as well. I mean, if you become a disciplined, rigorous thinker, you're ready for your working world. And in fact, most people, I don't know if it's the same here, but the statistics in the state show that students who study humanities disciplines over the course of their life actually earn more money and progress higher in their careers than students who focus on the more technically oriented disciplines. Because over time, the skills you learn in the liberal arts help you in ways that are maybe less evident in a starting job, but more important as you progress. You become somebody who has skills of communication, social skills, ability to analyze, ability to think in a complex manner. So over the course of one's working life, these things play out positively. But liberal arts from the get-go doesn't center on questions having to do with utility. It centers on questions that are abstract. And so convincing families, convincing students that a liberal arts education is something that's to their benefit, it's hard to do in a climate we have where people feel economically distressed, where the cost of education seems to be rather unattainable for some families. They're worried about what happens after. So it makes a lot of sense to me from a practical perspective why families look towards careers that seem to provide a direct and steady pathway towards that first job. But I often say at St. John's, other colleges and universities might be preparing you for your first job. We're preparing you for the rest of your life.